doesn't matter if you're actually technically right. If you make the customer feel wrong, you're wrong. I've learned a lot about you have to behave like Jesus did on the cross. Like, this is God dying for the same people, killing him. I think customer service, sometimes you have to take that attitude of really just smiling and saying, like, they actually don't get it and it's okay.
We're talking with Miles Veth, who's the founder of Veth Group, which is an organization that's focused on demand testing in the B2B inbound and outbound marketing space. Miles, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Sean. I'm excited.
Super. So I thought to start, maybe you could talk a little bit about when you first became a believer. How did you first hear the gospel? How did you get saved?
Yes, I was 4 years old driving on the highway. So I was very young. I grew up in a great Christian home, and that was the earliest memory I have of first learning about the gospel. I got to go to Christian school through eighth grade, which helped cement a lot of biblical truth, whether it was things like Lee Strobel with Case for Christ, or just learning about a lot of the basic theology of the Bible or how that should impact some of our life choices. And then when I got to high school, I went to a public high school, so my faith started to become my own in the sense that I had to defend it. So I played baseball through college, but in high school, there are a lot of cases where people were probably hard on me for being a Christian, so I started to learn what that's like. And then I went to Wheaton College, which is a Christian school in college. So then I kind of got to come full circle and learn more about why Christianity and apologetics, and how do you make sense of the fact that there's so many world religions, or how do you wrestle with some questions like, why does God allow evil in the world, or how does a loving God send people to hell, or some of these things. And then basically now I'm 28, so a few years out of college, but the short of it, just have loved getting to learn how to integrate faith into my life in different areas over the past 28 years.
So maybe you could elaborate a little bit on, you'd mentioned something interesting. You said apologetics plays a key role, has played a key role as a youngster in your life. And now, if you looked on LinkedIn, it doesn't take you too long before you realize, okay, Miles Veth is the real deal. He's intending on making an impact for Christ, being a witness for the sake of the kingdom. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the relationship between how you see maybe your early apologetics, your understanding of how things fit together in terms of worldview, and the role of evangelism and how it fits into evangelism for you.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that the Winston Churchill had a great quote. Essentially, if a leader is going to make other people cry, he must first be brought to tears himself. So I think in apologetics sense, like before you're going to try to communicate a belief to somebody else to influence them, like you really do have to believe it yourself. And I think for me, it's been realizing like there's some things that, and outside of religion, like an atheist would say, oh, all the religions are relatively the same. They all have ancient books, or they all have, certain principles, or they all say some of the same things. And like at a high level, that comparison may be correct. But I think what differentiates Christianity is Jesus is the only person who ever claimed to be God, in term that had any kind of real standing as a human. Like our calendar's based off this person. So like LeBron James has never claimed to be God, or Donald Trump has never claimed to be God. Like Jesus said, I am God. And then substantiated that with the resurrection in terms of a historical event where like no one ever found Jesus's body. So you have this extremely powerful human, again, because our calendar is based off of him. You have this extremely powerful human who like lays down his life willingly, not like a revolutionary, which is, again, the Romans had plenty of revolutionaries like Spartacus. Jesus was not like a military revolutionary. He laid down his life. And then you have all these other people, like Peter or all these apostles, who are willing to die just on the basis of not renouncing that Jesus was God. And if you think about that, you start to think, there's something a little different about this. And the message of Christianity is not that follow these principles and you'll earn like God's favor. It's you'll never earn God's favor on your own, and God's bridging that gap for us. So a lot of people say, well, the church, if you go to the church and you see the divorce rate's just as high in the church, or like whatever, there's theft or there's lying or there's ego or something, they say, well, that Christians are no better than anybody else. And I think that's shouldn't come as a surprise when you think about the message being that it's God's grace is really the linchpin. It's not Christians' greatness, it's God's grace. So I think for me, understanding some of those things in very concrete terms over the years has really helped me when it's come to learning how to communicate it. And I built a brand on LinkedIn a few years ago as an entrepreneur where I was getting to the point where I had a single post get, I think, like 1.7 million views. And I was starting to get consistently like 20,000 views, 20,000 views. Like, so I started to see there's a lot of eyeballs, but I'm less interested in people learning about marketing principles or how to automate their lead gen or whatever. I'm much more interested in using this platform to honor God. And I made that shift a couple of years ago when Veth Group was very much still in its infancy. Um, and I thought it would probably hurt the business, but ultimately be the right thing to do. And I think it has actually, interestingly, led to a lot of conversations like this where I've made a great network of fellow Christians. And even from a business perspective, I think God has sheltered me from too much persecution because of it. Certainly, I get some hate mail, but nothing crazy. And no one's trying to shoot me or anything or hunt down our address or something. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of the story, I think. And as a marketer, as someone who's all day long, I have 100 clients. I'm trying to help them get their products into other people's hands. I think it's been a really cool lens to think about evangelism, which is kind of like the most important product I have.
That's really wonderful. I want to come back to that concept of making the shift into seeing your role with Veth Group as something more of a kingdom focused role. But first, I wanted to ask you a little bit about. I know you played baseball at Wheaton. Wanted to ask you about how that relates to now. It's not a simple or easy thing to say. Yeah, I played ball in college. Like that's high level stuff that we're dealing about right now. So, what particular success criteria do you think served you well in developing your company that you cultivated as an athlete?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I only Wheaton's Division 3. So I played in a couple Major League Baseball back summer leagues, which were a lot more competitive than Division 3. So like we're playing with kids from Vanderbilt or Miami or Arizona State or some of these big schools. And my roommate from one of those summers actually made it all the way to the major leagues. So I think for me playing in college is definitely a wide strata, but I was blessed to have a little bit of opportunity to see some of those great players, even though I was not necessarily playing at that level in college. And I think for me, the biggest learning from baseball was just learning how to deal with failure.
Hmm.
Because I think what I've realized is do, if you endeavor to really make a difference in business in a tangible way, like you're going to have to go down the path of doing things differently than other people, not just better. Like I think better will get you so far, but to build a company, you probably have to be doing something differently. I think to go into someone else's company and just do it a little better probably works, but to build your own at a real scale, like you really have to do things differently. So I think baseball has equipped me to learn how to fail because as a pitcher, you're failing less than as a hitter, but you're failing a lot. Like you're giving up home runs, you're walking people, you're losing games with it. There's a lot of people say, the hitters are the ones failing because if they fail 7 out of 10 times, they're in the Hall of Fame, which number one, I don't think a 300 batting average probably gets you into the Hall of Fame. But the other thing I disagree with that people miss is they think like, well, the pitcher just has it so easy. But the average pitcher, if they have an earned run average of 3 runs per 9 innings, if you take a relief pitcher, that means, one out of every 3 innings, they're giving up a run. A lot of times that could be pivotal times. So there's a lot of failure. And I think for us, as we've been on the cutting edge of learning how to reorient the way demand generation is done in American businesses with like automation and creativity and research and copywriting and all these things. I think it's equipped me, like baseball equipped me really well to understand that there's going to be all kinds of things I try that completely fail.
Mm.
And until you're, if you internalize that failure or that failure is crippling to you, you're not going to get very far just because in reality, like no one's that smart that most of their ideas are going to work.
That's so key. And it's not one that's well received, I think, in a lot of circles. The fact that failure is such a necessary thing to seeing success long term. And it's something we're, my wife and I are talking to our kids about that. They're not very good losers at all. So this is another indicator that we should be um, reinforcing that point. That's very helpful.
And I think it's also realizing too, like there's varying degrees of failure. Like failure as in like I live in my parents' basement and don't have a job and play Xbox all day and I'm a quote unquote failure. Like that's not an admirable failure. But like failure in the sense that you try to build a new type of insurance company and structure the like, you know, actuarial tables incorrectly and go out of business because you default on a claim, like that's good failure.
Mm.
Like you took a risk, like you were very in action. Like I think there's some baseline hygiene factors, like working 12 hours a day. Like I always say, like God gave us Sundays off, but not Saturdays off. I think there's some of these baseline things that, like, if you want to be successful, everyone is doing them. And then there's all these other things like it gets you the chance to get lucky or the chance to ride the right wave or the chance to meet the right people. But I think people mistakenly think if you just work 12 hours a day, you'll be successful, which I don't think is true. But I think that at the same time, they think that failure's a lot of people think failure's final, so they're working really hard and then they have a crippling blow. And a lot of times, I think those crippling blows are markers on the path to success as opposed to final. But we have to be careful as humans, like you said, not to. I think we all know at a high level, like, oh, failure's good. Like we like see all the quotes on LinkedIn, but a lot of us really, really, really hate the idea of actually having to experience it ourselves.
Common business philosophy says help people, serve people, never more than you can get. That's kind of what most folks actually show. When we look at, for example, your LinkedIn posts, we see that you have a strong service orientation and that you're willing to bring a greater measure of value than you may actually get back. It's very clear that you have that service orientation at the forefront of what you're about. So I wanted to talk to you about your approach to service orientation as it relates to your relationship with Christ. Maybe you could talk about how you see the relationship between those two, how service orientation relates to kingdom purpose.
Yes, a really good question. So I think that one of the challenges that we have as humans it is when you talk about faith being, you know, basically belief in something that we can't see, like being sure of what we're hope for, being certain of what we cannot see. Like there's an element of faith which is like choosing to like believe in the intangible over the tangible. So the challenge with when you talk about like investing is if I invest my money in Bitcoin with the expectation it's going to come back and I can see the Coinbase account every day and like it's very tangible. If I invest my money in giving it to a homeless person with the basically the belief or faith that that glorifies God, and like the Bible talks about someday you will have a reward for that, both of them are an investment of an input with the expectation of an output. But we're surrounded in a world that's very material where it's very hard to decide, rather than going to buy a Mercedes because I have money, I'm going to give that money to the poor because that honors God. And the ROI that I'm seeking is God being glorified as opposed to the ROI I'm seeking, being that other people think I'm special. So I think we're all doing that, whether it's related to faith or related to worldly stuff. So in terms of the service orientation, I've tried to just as much as possible set my heart on honoring God. So I'm like you said, I'm not taking the call from the customer at 11:30 at night because I'm hoping that they pay us more money. Like I'm able to take the call at 11 o'clock at night because I want to honor God in the way I serve the customers. And you're right, the way Jesus set that example of selflessness and humility and laying down his life and not returning blow for blow, like not being defensive, not being arrogant. Like there's a lot that we can learn that applies to customer service, which is I've in the 3 years I've had, a couple hundred customers, the I've never seen a time where if a customer comes after you, we're coming after them back leads to a positive outcome.
Hmm.
It just doesn't happen. There's a great video by Danny Meyer on YouTube called "The Irrelevancy of Being Right." His whole point is he's a famous restaurateur. His whole point is it doesn't matter if you're actually technically right. If you make the customer feel wrong, you're wrong. I think that's what it's like. He gave a story at investment bankers in his restaurant, and they said, this is the best Cabernet, and he said, no, it's not a Cabernet, and the guy said, yes, it is. So Danny Meyer went to the back room, brought out his encyclopedia, and said, look it, I'm right, you're wrong, in front of this person's friends. So he embarrassed the person. He said the person, I think sent a nasty email or like said he'd never bring his friends again. Like just a very telling example, which is Danny Meyer was objectively right. Like he was right about the wine. The customer knew he was right, and the customer still got angry for the way he was treated. I think I've learned a lot about you have to behave like Jesus did when he said, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. Like on the cross, like this is God dying for the same people, killing him, saying, please forgive them. Like they don't know any better. I think customer service, sometimes you have to take that attitude of like really just smiling and saying like they actually don't get it and it's okay. Like and the neediness and customer service like can be an enormously thankless job. And it's really hard. Like we're in a business with demand generation. We set about 1,000 appointments a month for 100 clients, and we got literally 3 of us doing it. Like it's not a huge operation, and it's tricky because doing that all day, like you could get 30 appointments, 30 appointments, 30 appointments, 30 appointments, never hear from the customer, and then the month you get 6, they call and fire you. Like in customer service, the negative feedback is 90% of it. The 10% of it's positive feedback. Like I don't think I'm yet to have a customer send me like an edible arrangements basket. Like, thank you so much for closing us the $300,000 deal. And that's just the nature because they're paying us. So I'm not saying they have to do that. I'm just saying what we start to realize is you have to be in a state of mind of humility because like your patience level and endurance to deal with that wall of emotion constantly can become very taxing.
Yeah.
Because you're not getting, it's not like, I mean, in Veth Group's case, we retain about 97% of customers per month.
Wow.
So we'll lose, one customer. Is June now, like probably July 1st. Out of the 100, we'll probably lose between 1 and 3 customers.
That's an incredible retention rate.
Yeah, which is good, and because we don't do any contracts, it's all month to month. Like, and right now we're adding about 10 a month, so it's like we've been growing really quickly. But what's so interesting is, again, like we're losing 1 customer, but the thing is, the 97 getting results, you're not going to hear about it. Like the thing you're not going to sleep with is the one that says I can. And it's hard because sometimes, I mean, we get 25 appointments or something, and it's like not enough. And so I've just learned in that you have to start to learn to think about it like serving and not serving man, serving God. Like my expression of serving God is how I treat these customers and attach Jesus's name to it. And that's it. It's not about the money. It's not about the retention rate. It's not about the accolades or the LinkedIn likes. Like it's just that, because if it's anything other than that, like it's not, this is where I disagree with a lot of Christians. It's not that you can't have an inordinate amount of earthly success if you focus on something else. It's just you're majoring in the minor thing. It's the way I see it. Yeah.
That is super helpful. And on top of the fact that, okay, you're just focusing on that in being able to focus on the service aspect the way that you have, there's the spin-off of having that success because you've been focusing on serving the King who has called you to serve the world. I think that's so key, and I think that's really difficult to do. It's easy to say, really tough to execute on. But I think that if you got a 10% a month on month. I mean, that really speaks volumes.
Yeah, and I think just like you look at my brother works at Amazon. Amazon's not an explicitly Christian company, but if you look at Amazon and Walmart, two of the really large consumer companies, both of them are pretty obsessed with serving the customer. They're not doing it to honor God as their motivation necessarily, but it's interesting. The principle, they're still living out the principle. And so it's like the fuel for me to do it is not to make money. The fuel for me to do it is to honor God. The fuel for them to do it might be to raise their stock price. But I think you're absolutely right. Like the principle of laying yourself down for the customer in the same way Jesus did, I think will drive ridiculous business results. Like, which is cool.
28 years old, spitting wisdom like an old man. Miles, I've really appreciated some of these things you say. This is really pithy, really good stuff. How you talked about Case for Christ making an impact in your life and how early apologetics has played a key role in that, and how the importance of apologetics to influence for the sake of educating and studying and prayer and making that happen, and how the importance of learning to deal with failure early on, how that's been parlayed into building the company in order to build a company that requires you to do things differently, and how you talked about the return on investment of someday you will have a reward. There's an input and there's also an output, but what's the reason for it? Is it for me? Is it for the honor of the Lord? Is he glorified in the middle of it? That's something to do some self-examination over. I think that's very helpful too. And how you talked about the irrelevancy of being right. It doesn't matter if you're right. If it makes them feel wrong, then what's the point? And how the importance of humility in order to deal with this wall of emotion that comes with starting a company, and this concept of serving God, how you serve these customers is being able to expand the kingdom by showcasing what he is all about. So, Miles, I've really appreciated our time together. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we close off our time?
No, thank you so much for the opportunity. And anyone who's interested in having a discussion about Jesus or anything else that we talked about today, I'd be more than happy to.